How's everyone doing? Good to see you. So I'm going to talk about future-proofing a Ruby stack. First of all, I'm going to apologise for my accent. I'm from Australia. You can understand me, right? Okay, good. All right. If you miss something I say because I am not understandable, or you just didn't understand it, I don't know, because I said something weird, just jump up and ask a question. Totally fine. I'm more than happy to be interrupted, so go for it. What I want to talk to you about today is more from the business aspect, actually, of what the future of your Ruby stack is. Full transparency, I'm not a senior developer. Like, obviously I'm a developer, but I'm the CEO of the company, which means that, I get to run a magnificent team of developers, of senior developers who know what they're doing. We have, as a company, we're quite large. We've onboarded tons of Ruby applications and still in present, like lots of new applications being onboarded all the time. And we get to look after some legacy applications and so on. I might talk about a few of those a little bit later. So as I said, not a technical talk. So what we're not going to talk about, we're not going to talk about improved concurrency. There's definitely other talks on that. We're not going to talk about the move from Rails 7 to 8, although that's important and you should know about it. We're not going to talk about that today. And what we're definitely not going to talk about is whether to use the term master or main, if you've been reading Twitter recently. Okay, so let's talk about, first of all, what the current Ruby application is. It's, for all of our diversity in our community, things are actually reasonably standard in Ruby world. So in Ruby, it's usually a Rails application, right? I mean, usually, not 100%, but usually. It's usually on AWS or Heroku. And I'm telling you this this is my experience talking to a lot of people. Every week I'm talking to companies that are running Ruby apps. And it's still AWS or Heroku. Most companies have either a developer that is working full-time on the application, could be a mid or a senior developer. Sometimes it's larger teams, sometimes that's outsourced to companies like mine, but there's usually developers. So things are usually under constant work, usually speaking. And the question that a lot of clients ask me is, am I doing things the right way? And, I'm not controversial at all. Like, I don't go for any controversy. And I've got to say, there's no right or wrong way to approach your stack. There are certainly some ways that I might consider better than others, and you might consider better than others, but we're all very free and welcome to have our own opinions. You have to do what's best for your applications, for your clients. You know what I mean? Just give me a quick show of hands. Who in here works as a developer? Okay, most of you. And then who's like an executive or some other part of the company? Okay, good. So what I want to talk to you today about is how to approach this stack from both sides. So if you're the manager, if you're the executive, if you're the CEO, then you've got control over that stack. You get to say, this is how it works, this is what server I want it on, this is what version I want to be on by next week, that sort of thing. If you're a developer, you might feel like you've got less of a viewpoint on that. And you might have some very, very valid opinions. And here's what I want to tell you from years of working in this industry. As a developer, I would like you to have more of an opinion that you can push up the organization. Because quite often the developers will know things like, hey, we should be upgrading from Ruby 2.0. Like, we should be upgrading from that. You know that very well. Does the CTO know that? Does the CEO know that? Maybe not. They might have the consideration about how expensive that is or why not to. So I just, as developers, I want you to have more of an opinion and feel free to be able to speak your mind, to say your opinion. Because you know what? You're the guys on the ground. You have the best viewpoint. In my company, I listen to my developers. When they tell me, hey, we need an extra week on this, or this isn't going to work, or that feature is not a smart feature. I listen to them. These guys know. Okay, so let's have a look at the current scene of where most Ruby stacks are at, and then we're going to talk about what the future is going to look like a little bit. Okay, So when I'm talking to people, 3 main considerations that we come up against. One is security. And this is probably, by survey and anecdotally, the most important, is security. If it's not, probably should be. Security is one of those things that if you get it wrong, it's catastrophic. You might have had some experience with this, or you probably know some of the stories. You hear about data leaks, you hear about companies that get things wrong. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute. I'm going to give you an example of one that is absolutely horrific. The second consideration that we hear about is the ease of development. You know, your production pipeline, your backlog. Do we write new features or do we improve the existing ones? Does the application do what my users want it to do? And you can often get the push and pull, because you might hear the noisy few who demand certain features get written, and they represent actually a small number of users. The large majority of people you don't hear from because things are going right. You know what I mean? Yeah. Okay. All right. There's probably some other points here that I haven't brought up. I'm just like, for me, these are the top 3. This is what comes up most. Okay. So let's dig into security a little bit more. So companies can sometimes not think about security as a top concern, a top consideration, and that is disastrous. Security is one of those things that where it goes when it's right and there's no infiltration and nobody's done anything wrong, you don't hear about and you don't have to worry about. When something goes wrong, it's a problem. I'm going to give you an example of this, one that you may have heard of. There's a company in Australia called Optus. Anyone heard of this company? Yeah, a couple of you. Yeah, it's sort of famous in the security world. So Optus is Australia's second largest telecommunications provider, about 10 million users. So they're pretty big, right? 10 million Australians have their details with Optus. One day, a mid-level developer in that company wanted to test out some work that he'd done, and somehow, for some reason, he was able to access the public database, and he connected that public database to his development. I mean, you get a shiver up your spine just hearing about this, right? And the worst happened. The absolute worst happened. Someone discovered that this had happened. It wasn't switched off, like somebody turned it on, was never switched off. Sometime later, 10 million records were taken. 10 million records. And I'm not just talking about names and email addresses. I'm talking driver's license numbers, passport numbers, because a mid-level developer did that. Now, was it that mid-level developer's fault? Actually, no. I mean, you could say, yeah, you know, he should have known better. But how would he have known better? He would have been better trained. He wouldn't have had access to that public database. There should be no way in the world that that database could ever be connected with a development pipeline. Just no way. So that's an obvious and horrific example. Millions of driver's licenses had to be reissued because of that. It was just horrific. And that guy probably felt really bad about it. But whose job was it? Well, okay, you got senior management. That's whose job it was. So as a developer on the tools, you should be pushing for higher security, because when things go wrong, you shouldn't get blamed for that. I mean, for sure, you know, you need to do your due diligence and be cautious and everything else. But security is your concern, but it's also a management, it's an organizational concern. Here's another problem that's looming for all of us. It's the problem of AI. It's not looming, it's present right now. And I'm not going to harp on AI, I might bring it up again in a moment. But when you feed your data into a generative AI model, what happens to that data? It's a thing to think about. It's something to think about. The answer is, I actually don't know. I mean, the larger companies will tell you that that data is not being used to train the models, but I'm not sure about that. And you shouldn't be sure about that either. So just have that as a consideration. If your company or you yourself want to use a generative AI model and there's information going into it that needs to be, that is personal in some sense, you're going to want to do that all on board. Keep it within your own server. Make sure that data doesn't go outside your server. Think about that very seriously, because it's a little bit of the Wild West out there at the moment. The other point on security, obviously, is the infrastructure. I'm going to talk a little bit more on that in a moment. And obviously, versions. What versions are you running? We talk about this endlessly, of course. You know, it's the question that it's the first question I ask every single new client that comes to me. What versions are you running? What's the development to get that upgraded? Typically in companies, and I tell you this with the greatest of love for those companies, they want to build features and they want to fix bugs, all very well and good and should be done. The upgrades come later. So in the last 12 months, I've done some very, very extensive upgrades for some very, very big companies. Some of them might be represented here today. I'm not going to mention them because you might even be in this room right now. And I'm sorry if I'm talking about you. But those very, very large companies with millions of users haven't done their upgrades, still operating off old versions. It's, you know, you think it's embarrassing, but I think we've all experienced it. The next one, okay, feature upgrades, bugs, or the latest versions. So how do you prioritize those concerns? Now, you know, when we talk about these upgrades, I've seen some horrendous things. You've probably seen them too. We did an upgrade for a company recently. They were on Ruby 1.0. How does that even happen? I don't know. There's probably people in this room that weren't even born when Ruby 1.0 was around. Like, that's how old that is. Puts it in perspective, right? When you get a company like that, interesting thing, the developer who was the main developer on that, obviously he tells me he's getting pushed to write new features all the time, and so that's why he can never get around to the upgrades. And anytime he did start it, it was like, the job is so big, how do I even start it? The truth of it was, he knew how to program in those versions, and you know, the corresponding Rails version, which might have been 2 or something, I can't remember. He knew how to program in that. Not many people do. Like, you actually have to know something about those languages at that time to be able to program in that. So it makes it extra hard. His job was secure because of that. Not a great look. So anyway, again, if he's listening, I'm sorry. So we know that upgrades can be hard work. They can be a lot of work. In particular, if you've sort of left it a little while and you're on an older version, let's say you're on Rails 4 maybe or 5, the upgrades can take a bit of work. You know, some of those larger ones that I was telling you about with millions of users, that's many, many weeks of work. Estimate to do one recently was 26 weeks of development. That sounds like a lot, but that was 26 weeks from a guy who knows how to do Rails upgrades, Ruby upgrades, knows how to write the tests, knows how to run the pipeline and all of that. Like, that's, you know, that's serious work to get those done. That one in particular involved rewriting all the SQL as well, so that was a whole different thing. So have some influence on the executives and the management in your businesses, and if you're a CEO or CTO or someone like that in this room, put some consideration into it, because upgrades are important, not just for security, stability, speed as well. Okay, server costs. This one apparently is a hot topic. So like I said, I'm using, in our company we use AWS or we use Heroku. I am aware that these are not the cheapest options in the world. I'm well aware of that. Why do we use them? We use them because they are the most certain. And when I'm dealing with large companies and I'm dealing with businesses whose very production and day-to-day work relies on their applications, they need to know that that server has maximum uptime. Never 100%, but maximum uptime. They need to know that the security is not in question. They need to know that if it falls over, someone can put it back up rapidly. These things are more than minor considerations. If a company's server goes down and their application stops working and I get a phone call at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm not going to be super happy about that. So I want to make sure it's working. So for those reasons, we, I guess, to put it bluntly, pay the premium. That doesn't mean that cheaper server options aren't out there, and you might want to test those. And I'm talking to you from a history of, I have a confession to make. I started as a PHP developer. So let me apologize for that straight away. And back in the day, everything was by FTP. And, you know, I thought that was the best system. It wasn't. It was dreadful. It was absolutely dreadful. Pushing straight to production, by the way. So when I discovered AWS and I discovered cloud servers, it was like, this is incredible. This is amazing. There is actually security implications that can be taken care of here. I can actually spin up a whole pipeline here. I can use this thing called Git, never heard of it before. You know, all of these things were amazing and impressive to me, and so I paid for it. And then as those companies, AWS and subsequently Heroku, grew, they started increasing their costs because they had to. They entered the market at a loss, at a very big loss, as a matter of fact. I don't know if you remember AWS when it first started, it was like, everyone was like, how can they do it this cheaply? Truth is, they couldn't. And then we see a lot of things on the market today that are at a lower price point for much better performance, you know, higher performing CPUs and so on. There's a concern that those ones will go up. I'm not going to say they are because I don't run those companies and I don't know their profit and loss statements, but I have a feeling they're probably going to move up in price at some point. They certainly have to improve in performance, as in uptime. So these things are considerations. Community contributions. This one's very important to me, very dear to my heart. Obviously, I'm a sponsor of this event here today, but I sponsor a lot of events. I do the ones in Australia as well, and I try to spread it as much as I can. Why do I sponsor? I sponsor because the community is important. Yes, it gives me some exposure, all the rest of it, whatever, but I can do that through Google Ads as well. This is much more important to me. You know, what we do here and this community is so much more important. So consider yourselves, whether you're working for a company, or you're working for yourself, or you run a company, consider GEMS, consider sponsorship, consider open source, contributing to open source. Here's another one that's very, very important, is giving your developers, or if you're a developer yourself, time to upskill. Now, a lot of companies do this, and if you do that, thank you very much. But I think it is very, very important. In reinteractive, we have a full day every week where our developers upskill. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what else gets done in that in a moment. The third point on community contributions includes mentorships and community events. So we've run a lot of these sorts of activities in Australia, and I realise they can be a lot of work, and I realise it can be quite an imposition to do them. But mentoring or going to events where you can help people on board and learn how to spin up Ruby and Rails on their machines, it's very, very important. When I go to these events, when I go to the Ruby conference in Australia, there's like maybe 150, 200 people, like a lot smaller than this one, obviously. But out of all of those, people constantly are coming up to me saying, hey, I got into the industry because of your company or because of what you did. This is not, you know, I'm not telling you this to be egotistical or anything. I'm telling you because it's important to do. Like, a small contribution to the community means an entire career for someone, entire applications running on Ruby that were not before and now will be because of what you do. Another point that I didn't put down here is contribution in terms of writing articles. So you have senior developers, or you are a senior developer, and because of that you have this vast repository of knowledge up here. And this is incredibly important. So when you solve a problem or you do something that you think no one else has properly done before, you should write it down. Write an article. Now, it doesn't matter if the article is this big or this big. It doesn't matter. But write it down, get the article written. I get probably about 2 articles a week out of my team. Sometimes a bit less, sometimes a bit more. But these technical articles, right, this is not for SEO purposes. I don't get them to write these things because it's great for our SEO. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes the strangest things rank well that you just didn't expect to. But we write it because one day in the future, some developer is going to be looking for a solution to something, and ChatGPT is not going to know the solution to it, but our article will be there for them. That's why we do it. So this history of what we do and how we do it is important. AI, going to talk very briefly about it. If you're using AI in your applications, think about, do I actually need this? The same as you do when you're writing a feature, do I actually need it? You know, is this going to be important? Is it going to be used? You know, does anyone think this is valuable? Goes doubly for AI, because you can spend a lot of time trying to write it, trying to get it right, trying to make it useful, and find that no one's going to use it. So use AI correctly where it's needed. Like we have an application we wrote recently that the company has a ton of emails that come in overnight. They're an import company, so these emails arrive overnight, and they need to be able to pass those emails to understand what to purchase for the next day, right? Because they're in Australia, the emails are coming out of Europe. They can't read all those emails in enough time to action those emails. Someone else has already bought the stock before they did. So we wrote something to pass those emails, to read them. These are all like plain text, nothing formatted, all unformatted. So we read the emails, dump it into a database, and they know first thing in the morning exactly what to buy and what not to buy. So that's a great use, very low touch, it's good use. It's about 98% accurate too, so that works well. Another company I'm recently working with is a real estate company. They help people buy and sell real estate. They want to build an application, and the application has to be able to filter through, you know, I want 2 bedrooms, this location, this many bathrooms, this space, all of that sort of stuff, you know, the normal filters that you see on those real estate apps. So he said, I need all of those. I go, oh, why don't we just do it as like a plain text? Well, you know, plain text, I'm looking for a house that has blah, blah, blah. And he goes, why? What's the benefit of that? And I went, you're right. There's actually no benefit to that. It doesn't help anybody. Tick the boxes. It's much clearer. It's very plain. Nobody's going to get it wrong. There's no hallucination happening. You know what I mean? So just think about where you're going to implement and where you're not. That's all I'm going to say on the subject of AI. Okay, looking to the future now, very rapidly. We know security is the most important, or at least should be. Stay on top of your upgrades, obviously. Make sure the application is tested, and do testing at regular intervals. So I don't just mean pen testing. There's a bunch of tests that are necessary, you know, making sure your gems are all properly published and up to date, things like that. Making sure your form inputs are all correctly done, you know, proper filtering. Making sure that, what else? I don't know. Like there's a bunch of things that, you know, you need to consider when you're writing your applications. There's automated tests for all these things, so you don't have to be overly concerned. Just run those tests. Make sure they're done regularly. The other thing I do in our company is staff training. So we use a company called KnowBefore. I don't know if you've heard of KnowBefore. They do, well, they sort of started off doing just phishing testing for staff, but they've sort of broadened that out quite a lot. But they do regular testing and education of the staff. So we run them through quizzes, and we do testing, and we send them emails to check that they don't click on the wrong link, you know, those sorts of things. You have no idea. Like when we first started this testing, this is a company of really, really smart people, and we had a 50% failure rate on the phishing tests, 50%. The last test that we did, 0. So the education works. Recommend it very, very thoroughly. In particular, a company like ours, we're dealing with other people's data all of the time. If we do something wrong, you know, I think the company's over if that happens. So consider that. Leads me on to staff training. Provide time for your staff to be properly trained. Like allow their time for study. We give our staff a full day every week to do this. So I charge our clients for a 4-day week, so the 5th day is used for that. Occasionally it's taken over by a public holiday or something, but that's basically how that works. It means that you always have internal knowledge to solve problems. It means that you always have the smartest guys on the block. If you do that, currently I'm getting through all of my staff through the Ruby Silver Cert program. Do you know about this program? It's an official certification, and it's tough, like it's hard. The staff did a dummy test to start off this process. We did a dummy test, and we had, you know, like the top result, the top score was 75% out of, you know, these really smart senior developers. The top score was 75%, and it went down from there. So now we've done a bunch of retesting. We've had the staff write questions for each other to test each other out. It's working really well. And now we're going for the actual silver cert itself, and I think we've just got the first one through just recently, and then the next and the next, and we'll get everybody through, and then we'll go for the gold certificate after that. In doing this, we're sort of making it a game. Like, you know, there's a game going on now of who can get the best scores, who can write the toughest questions, but it becomes an activity that the staff play against each other. And our team, like many of your teams will be, is completely remote. So I have staff at every corner of the planet, but they can still play against each other. And it's a great way to have people internally connect with each other. If you do this sort of thing, you'll also have less staff turnover. We've got developers that have stayed with our company for a very long time. We don't have a lot of turnover, and I realise it happens in these sorts of companies, I understand. But if they're achieving new things constantly and feel like they're progressing personally and in their careers, then, sorry, I don't know where my slides went, then they feel like they're achieving something. Make sense? All right. And this is the most important point. The people are our greatest asset. When we talk about our Ruby stack, this is the most important. This element here is the one that needs the biggest concern and the biggest attention and the most attention from you. Here's something that I'm going to tell you that I think is incredibly important. In your company, the morale of your staff is directly dependent upon their production. Now, of course, the perks are nice, you know, nice chair, a nice desk, all the rest of it. These are incredibly important. But if you want happy staff, they're productive staff. That means they're shipping features regularly. They feel like they've achieved something. When they've completed an application or completed a scope of work or a project, that they know the result of that. Hey, the client was super happy with that. They loved us. They want to use us again. You know, that sort of thing. It's very important. That company that we did that development for last year, they've just grown 150% because of the feature you wrote. And this is stuff that happens regularly with our code when we write it. But sometimes we forget to tell each other these things. So it's good to know. It's good to find out that actually you weren't just valuable, but incredibly valuable. Okay. And this doesn't just go for the developers, by the way. It goes for every person in your staff. It goes for the marketing team and HR and the salespeople. The salespeople sometimes never find out. They sell something and the development team do it and they do a great job, and someone forgets to tell the sales guy, hey, that was a fantastic application that you advised them on. That feature worked incredibly well. Just saved that company a ton of money, you know? So make sure you tell everyone. Okay, summary then. So your Ruby stack is benefited by considering the security, the performance in terms of the development pipeline and backlog, and the budget is a concern, but less of one. I didn't really talk about it in this talk here because it becomes sort of obvious. It's actually a secondary concern, the budget. Consider these now, like today, in what you're doing, and their future state. So you have to think now about what things are going to be like in a year or so. And remember finally that people are your real and greatest asset. We've only got a few minutes left, but any questions? Anything you want to ask me? Yeah. Yeah, right. So obviously we're agile, obviously. So how do you do the calculation? You have to take into account all the various scenarios and then select the most obvious path. That's how I would do it. So yes, you can go, okay, I know we need to do the upgrade from, let's say we're going to go 7 to 8, and we're going to plan that for March, April next year. Okay, that sounds fair. What if something comes up in the meantime that is more important? Okay, we might have to pivot to that. But don't forget, you know, just keep it on the timeline. Maybe it moves out by a month, but keep it on the timeline. Yeah, yeah. Any other questions? If you want to ask me anything personally, just come up and grab me at the end. I'll be around. I've also got some beanies. If you want a beanie, come and grab me. They are very necessary in the weather here. I didn't know. I knew it was going to be cold, but it was cold, right? Oh, we're not cold yet? This is not cold yet. Oh, okay. Okay, wait till it starts snowing. Oh, the lake freezes? Oh, does it really? Can you go ice skating on it? No, okay, not quite that frozen. Oh, okay. Right. Okay, great. All right. Well, I'll be going home on Saturday then. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. So it can be colder. All right, well, thanks very much for talking to me today. My number's up there. Give me a call anytime. I've got a US number if you need to call that. Or you can email me or jump onto LinkedIn and find me. It's under the QR code. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.